It's a PFTPM podcast. Change of venue. A little too toasty out to be in the barn. We've got an air conditioner there, but it's loud and it doesn't quite do the job. So I'm in my office. I don't think I've ever done this from my office before. I did the DP show the other day. So this is the location. This is where I work all the time. I cleared all the crap out of the way, forced me to clean my office. We'll keep my office clean if this becomes a new semi-location for the PFTPM podcast. And I know some of you have been agitating for the podcast, and I apologize I haven't done them more frequently. It's been busier working on the website, cranking out content in recent weeks than I thought it would be. This is supposed to be the slow time, and I thought it would be even slower than usual this year with no real off-season programs, with limited media access, although plenty of teams are doing a good job making players, and coaches available. But with the seismic changes that are happening in society and how that's spilled over to the NFL, it has made things busier than anticipated in June of 2020. But that's okay. I like having plenty to do. I just haven't had time to do the podcast. We're doing it today. And it's questions only. No guests, no preordained topics, although I may from time to time deviate into some other topic depending upon what a question makes me think of. And I'm going to get started as I always do at the top of the stack, PFTPM Posse. Since I follow that account, the questions that he posts end up on top. And this one comes via the PFTPM Posse from OG Tom G Post. What about teams sequestering together during the week and only being allowed home on weekends after their families have been tested as well? Makes for a long season, but would significantly reduce the risk of infection and the number of tests. All right. This question flows from comments made by Dr. Anthony Fauci regarding the possibility or his opinion or whatever it may be that the NFL won't be able to play this season without utilizing the bubble concept that we're going to see from the NBA in Orlando. Now, there are concerns about Dr. Fauci because from time to time, it does seem like he's a little bit all over the map. And also, he's the guy that has become faces of inconvenience. And at some point, people were bound to be annoyed with the things he's saying because he's telling us things we don't want to hear. We don't like the people who tell us the things we don't want to hear. We like the people who tell us the things we want to hear. A lot of times growing up between your mom and your dad, you end up liking the parent that gives you all the stuff you want and not liking the parent as much who imposes the discipline. That's kind of the way it goes. It's human nature. And Dr. Fauci has become, as far as the government is concerned, the parent that is always telling you what you need to do. And from time to time, it does annoy people, but we probably should listen to him and we probably should heed his advice and his opinions. And even without his advice and his opinions, there's been kind of a sense in recent weeks that this thing could go off the rails by the time we get to September, October, November, especially because of the way we see the virus increasing and the cases increasing and the warnings becoming more dire in some states that we thought were in the clear and that they thought they had everything under control. And the reality is there's a virus out there that is not going to all of a sudden decide to declare victory and retreat. So I, as a preliminary matter, don't necessarily disagree with Dr. Fauci's assessment that it will be very difficult to have an NFL season without a bubble concept. But I also think that a bubble concept is going to be very, very difficult to accomplish, especially with 32 NFL franchises and 53 players per roster plus practice squads that could be as large as 16. That's a lot of people. When you throw in the coaches and the other essential personnel, that's a lot of people to say you have to essentially surrender your life for the next 4 or 5 months, stay within a very contained environment. And oh, by the way, if it sounds familiar, remember when I mentioned that as a possibility, taking everyone to Area 51 or the Greenbrier in West Virginia or somewhere, building basically a dormitory or barracks and having enough fields there and just doing it all in a self-contained world that is free from and insulated from the virus. And people thought how crazy that was. Well, that may be the only way to do it. And if you're not willing to do it, and if you can't pull that off, and I think it would be very hard to pull off, then you don't have football season. mean, that's the thing. There's a point where the NFL may have to ask itself, are we willing to do something that would be so extreme to allow football season to happen? And would we choose that over just not having football season? So that's where this question comes from. It is an outgrowth of this possibility, as raised by Dr. Fauci, that the NFL may have to go with a bubble approach in order to get the season in. Now, keeping the teams together all week long, and then they see families on the weekends. Well, you play games on the weekend. So I think you would have like a Tuesday, Wednesday maybe, where you would be with your family. But yeah, your family's going to have to be tested as well. And if your family, now, where is your family? Where are you? Do you sequester each team in its own community? Is it like mini bubbles where the players are kept away from everyone else, but you have 32 independent bubbles? Or do you just have a location where all of the teams go and they stay there, and there's no travel, there's no flying, there's no anything, there's no intermingling with the population? I don't know. And again, once we start going down this path, we see how complicated it is. Like everything else related to the virus in the NFL, you answer a question, 5 more questions pop up. And you answer those 5 questions, and 5 more questions pop up, and it continues until it mushrooms out of control. That could happen. And I've been saying for a while now, especially after last week when the NFL, number one, sends out a protocol that seems very, very restrictive and unrealistic when juxtaposed against eventually you have to go out on a football field. That plus the NFLPA saying we never agreed to any of this, plus John Harbaugh, the coach of the Ravens, saying it's humanly impossible to comply. I don't have a great feeling. I don't have a significant degree of confidence that the NFL has or will have the right kind of plan in place. All that said, look, I like the creativity. I just don't think this is practical either. I think that the ultimate solution, the best solution, short of a bubble, and I don't think the bubble will work, you need to have basically an airlock at every facility where you enter, you get tested every time you show up. Every time you go through the doors to the facility, you get tested. If you're negative, you proceed. If you're positive, you get moved toward whatever the quarantine protocol is. And I think you get tested on the way in. And I think it's socially responsible to get tested on the way out. So there isn't somebody who's become positive in the 12 hours that he or she has been at the facility and is leaving and going back into the community. So test on the way in, test on the way out. And the key is having the right kind of testing technology so that when the test is implemented, you get a quick result, it's a reliable result, and it reflects whether or not the person is positive. If you have it, you're positive. If you don't, you're negative. I've heard 2 or 3 tests per week. Look, here's what we're trying to avoid. We're trying to avoid a person who is positive and shedding virus, as they say. It sounds very graphic, and it's just kind of gross. If someone is shedding virus, you don't want that person going out onto a practice field or into a game and infecting multiple people. How do you ensure that doesn't happen? Now, you ideally don't even want them in the facility if they're shedding virus, but within the facility, it looks like there will be some effort to maintain at least 6 feet of distance and masks and arrows, like when you go to the store now and you're like a rat in a maze looking for the cheese and you're following the arrows around. That may help, but when you get to the point where you go into a practice field or into a game, that's when it goes out the window. You can't have somebody positive in that setting. And unless they're designing hazmat suits that will wrap around the uniform, it's going to be pretty hard to play football. And I think people are starting to realize that now. It's going to be pretty hard to play football if there's any chance that one person in that 22-man scrum is positive for the virus. So, look, long answer, bearable. As of right now, I'm having a hard time feeling optimistic about the NFL figuring out everything it has to figure out, especially because there hasn't been much of an effort to get us informed and us to buy in. And maybe they don't care. At some point, they need to care. At some point, they need to do and say something more than we plan to play the full season to get people to say, I think they have a plan to play the full season that is practical, that works, and that takes into account the realities of the virus. And when I hear Dr. Fauci say what he said, and I see the response that was issued by Dr. Alan Sills, the NFL's chief medical officer, I look at it and I say, man, I just think it's an uphill fight, and I hope they pull it off. I want football. Anytime these issues come up, you're rooting against football. I'm not rooting against football. I am rooting for football, and I'm trying to make sure that everyone who is in a position to resolve these issues is thinking about these issues and coming up with the appropriate solutions. PFTPM Posse. The posse started conversing with my nephew, Anthony Zeech, who does tremendous design work, working on making some posse shirts. Would you let him put PFT and PFTPM shirts on his Etsy so we can buy them from him? How is that a question for the mailbag? I suppose. I don't know. I got to talk to him about whether he even wants to do it. If there's going to be a revenue stream here, I'd kind of like to get a little, I'd like to get a little taste of it myself there, PFTPM Posse. You're trying to keep money off my account here. You're trying to keep food off my plate. I'm kidding. We'll probably do something like that. I don't know that we do PFTPM often enough to justify the T-shirts. There was a push like 2 years ago when we did this more often, and maybe at some point we will do it more often. Maybe once the world returns to semi-normal, we will do it more often. So I'll take it under advisement, like so many other things. But typically, you know what it means when I take something under advisement. It's like the NFL tabling a proposal until May. I'll take it under advisement indefinitely, which means we may never hear from it again. We know NFL owners are going to cut costs somewhere if the players don't, and they shouldn't accept a pay cut. Where is that likely to be? And will it have a negative impact on player health and safety? For example, cutting medical training rehab staff. Here's what I think is going to happen. If the players refuse, as they should, to any type of a give back approach. And under the CBA, there's nothing in there that requires players to reduce salaries for this year, even if they lose games this year. The CBA has a provision that triggers an obligation to sit down and negotiate future salary caps if games are canceled this year. And it's kind of redundant because they negotiate the salary cap every year. But that's the only thing in there. That's the only thing remotely resembling a force majeure clause in the CBA. So if the league approaches the union and says we want to cut 10% off the board, we want everyone to take a 10% reduction in the salary they're supposed to make this year. That means, for example, Dak Prescott, if he doesn't sign a long-term contract, $31.4 million, you take away $3.14 million from him. If you're supposed to make $5 million, you take away $500,000. You can do the math for the most part. Point is, if the players say no, what happens? I'm concerned what will happen is, at that point, the teams will identify middle-class players, guys making $3, $4, $5 million a year, guys who otherwise would be at risk of a late August, hey, we want you to take a pay cut, and if you don't, we're going to cut you. And if we cut you, no one else is going to sign you because everybody's got their roster set, so you're pretty much screwed, so you better take the pay cut. That happens all the time. I think they'll be more aggressive with that. They may not even negotiate the pay cut. They may just cut the guy. Gone. Boom. And I think that's who's at risk. And when you couple that with what I've heard about some teams being inclined to take only 75 or 80 guys to camp, well, who are the 10 or 15 you get rid of before you go to camp? It's not draft picks. Is it undrafted free agents that you may have, that you do have under contract at very cheap amounts? Do you just get rid of them? Who do you get rid of? And I think that people who will be at jeopardy if they do take fewer than 90 players to camp, or when it's time to go to week one of the regular season, when veteran salaries become, as a practical matter, guaranteed, that's when I think some of these middle-class guys may have to worry. And what the NFLPA needs to do, need to watch this very carefully. If they do indeed tell the league, pound sand or salt or whichever the right word is, I never know. The NFLPA needs to make sure that, for example, there isn't a coordinated effort by all teams to trim 10% of their anticipated salary budget for the season. And some teams get rid of 3 or 4 guys. Some teams get rid of 1 or 2, whatever. If the total amount is they all cut about 10% of what they were otherwise due to pay, it's going to look a little bit like coordination, which is collusion, which is illegal under the CBA. 32 distinct businesses under the labor deal are able to do the things that the CBA allows them to do by way of decision-making when it comes to their roster and whatnot. But you can't do something like what I just laid out. If you go to the players and say, we want you to cut 10%, they say no, and they all agree, hey, you know what, we're going to wink, wink, nod, nod, we're all going to cut 10% off of our salaries, and let's all do it so no one is at any type of a disadvantage moving forward. All right, next question. PFTPM Posse, important question. What have you had on the grill lately? What activities have you been doing to keep yourself occupied? Why have you started getting haircuts again? Not judging. Are there minimal COVID cases in your area? Are you taking extra safety precautions, etc.? That is quite a long question there. Let me begin with the grill. Here's what and this dovetails with another part of it. I go to the store maybe once a week and I wear a mask, and I try not to act judgy of the people who are there without masks. I try to be look straight ahead, no facial expressions. It helps when most of your face is covered by a mask, which for me is an improvement. I get pissed off though when I sense a vibe from someone who isn't wearing a mask. By seeing someone else in a mask, they're made to feel like maybe they should be wearing a mask, so they get pissed off at the person who's wearing the mask. And I detect that from time to time and haven't said anything yet, and I probably won't, but man, I get irritated by that. Like, don't get mad at me because I'm doing the right thing and reminding you that you're not doing the right thing, that you're not being considerate of your fellow man, that you're not protecting yourself or anyone else because you insist on walking around without a mask on. So anyway, I'll go to the store once a week. I got a mask that I wear. One day I had my sunglasses on and the mask, and it's a black mask. And it's like, I walked in and I realized I had the sunglasses on. I mean, there's a certain point where they think you're going to rob the place. The combination of the mask and the sunglasses, pretty close to looking like a guy who's intent on robbing the place, especially when the mask is black. So anyway, I go to Kroger, the local grocery store. They have excellent steak. If you live near a Kroger, and I can't vouch for the meat department at other Krogers, the meat department here has excellent steaks. So ribeyes, fillets. Once or twice a week, I'll make some, and whatever's left over gets put, in Tupperware and gets thrown back on the grill or even in the microwave. It's awesome. It's awesome. I use the McCormick Montreal steak seasoning, liberally applied to each side. Try to do a couple of minutes on each side on fairly high heat. The ribeyes cook quickly. The fillets take a little bit longer, but that's what I've been doing on the grill. Although we had I should be ashamed to admit this, we hadn't made hot dogs the other night. We hadn't had hot dogs in a while. Holy crap. A very well-grilled hot dog is just absolutely excellent. We go with Nathan's hot dogs, by the way. Tasty, very tasty. No endorsement there, not getting paid. I'm disgusted by the hot dog eating contest, so I probably should eat hot dogs other than Nathan's. I should be anti-Nathan's. Either way, the Nathan's hot dog is pretty good. What was the rest of this question? What have I been doing to keep myself occupied? I just work all the time. If you haven't noticed, I work all the time. I still work out an hour a day. I play Madden while I work out on the exercise bike. My ultimate team is up to a 97 and a half. I'm going 97 and a half because the defense is a 98. The offense is a 97. After we're done here, I'll go down and get my hour in. I get an hour at about 27 miles an hour. I don't stop until I get my 27 miles and 650 calories burned. And then at night, I'll work outside. I got some other projects I'm working on that we'll discuss at some point at the appropriate point. Some other writing projects that I kind of have in the hopper, 2 of them, by the way. But most of the time, I'm working on the website, planning the show for the next day, whatever the case may be. And I've just stayed here. We've had family over and we have a large patio, so we separate out there. We do that once a week or so, have everybody over for dinner, very careful about keeping our distance. We had a night where I had some friends over and we watched the UFC fights. We took a TV out and put it on the patio and kept our distance. And, so my life hasn't been all that much different because I really don't go anywhere anyway. I think Kyler Murray said that recently. For him, none of this has been much of a change because he really doesn't do anything. It's kind of how it is for me. I go to the store once a week now. I had a long stretch where I didn't go out at all, like 35 days. But about once a week I go out. And as to the haircuts, right before the lockdown, I got a haircut. My longtime barber, who still works at a different job, no longer cuts hair, I got him to come over to the house and he gave me a haircut. And then it got really, really long. But then once they started to reduce the restrictions here in West Virginia, I had him come back. We did the mask. We kept our distance. It was very, very safe. That was several weeks ago. And then this past weekend, the place where I currently get my haircut, it was their first day back. And I was able to finagle early access before it was even open. So I went in before they opened on their first day back and got my haircut then. And we'll see how it goes from here. The cases in West Virginia have been going up. They haven't been rampant here, but they have been going up. I have a friend who recently was diagnosed with coronavirus, and he was here a couple of weeks before he was diagnosed for a little get-together we had out on the patio, and it happens. It's nothing to be ashamed of. People are going to get it. It's an invisible virus that is airborne, that is potent, and that it happens. And I'm just hopeful I can avoid it for as long as I can. I don't know how it's going to go this season. If there is football, and I hope there is, traveling back and forth to Connecticut, maybe we'll all be doing the Football Night in America show from home studios. I don't know if that's the case. I already got one, so it's not going to be a pain in the butt for me to get one ready, but we'll see how that all plays out. And the virus is the thing that is going to control all of this. End of the day, the virus is in charge. All we can do is react to it. Rob Foster, 135. I'd really like to hear Sim's evaluation of his father versus Terry Bradshaw. I don't know. I mean, they really didn't play at the same time. Like Sims versus Joe Montana would make more sense. Terry Bradshaw is just kind of a random name in this context because they were from not different eras, but different decades when they were prominent. But I don't know. If I remember, I'll ask Sims to give me an evaluation that I can pass along to you of Phil Simms versus Terry Bradshaw. Robert Block, 07. How do you explain your ridiculous hypocrisy, here we go, of championing the limit to spread COVID, March 19 article on Sean Payton, while not being critical of players participating in large public gatherings when team facilities were closed due to health concerns of the ongoing pandemic? What large public gatherings are you talking about? What are we talking about? And here's the thing. Early on in the process, I was very vigilant about pointing out that states were on lockdown, but players were doing things that violated the lockdown. You're supposed to stay at home. You're out working out, all touching the same football, posing together for pictures. It was clearly violating the local orders. And people went nuts. People jumped my stuff. I'm trying not to curse, so Matt Casey doesn't have to worry about bleeping anything. But and it was stunning to me. It was like, wait, people, and that was the first time. And I remember telling my wife, you know what's going to happen? Eventually, there's going to be a revolt against these restrictions, and people are just going to act like they never existed, and they're just going to go back to living their lives. And their attitude is going to be, screw this, we don't want to do this anymore. Because I'm getting resistance for pointing out that people are doing things that are irresponsible that may spread the virus. So fine, you want to do irresponsible things and spread the virus? Go ahead. I'm going to continue to be careful. Others are going to continue to be careful. I mean, if it's and this is where we need to understand the difference between assuming a risk of something that only affects you versus assuming a risk of behavior that can affect you and also other people. This isn't the equivalent of driving a motorcycle without a helmet. When you drive a motorcycle without a helmet, you are risking serious injury or death to you. When you participate in any type of activity that is contrary to what we've been advised to do as it relates to the virus, you're putting others at risk, because if you catch it before you know you have it, or if you're one of the many who never know they have it, what happens? You potentially give it to someone else, and they give it to someone else, and so on until grandma or grandpa are dead. That's the key distinction. You're participating in the conveyance of a virus that eventually will kill either your grandma or grandpa or someone else's grandma or grandpa or your diabetic cousin or brother or nephew or niece or aunt or uncle or someone else's. That's the difference here. This isn't, hey, I'm willing to take the risk that I'm going to get it. I'm young, I'm healthy, I want to have fun, I want to do my thing. You're participating in the potential spread of something that has already killed 120,000 people, and they're projecting 200,000 now by October. And it's one thing to look at those numbers and say, wow, that's a lot. And you know, one of the arguments I see, and well, you know, 7,500 people died of other stuff today. Like that makes it okay. There are deaths that are going to happen for reasons that are not preventable. And then there are the deaths that will happen for a preventable reason. And this virus, it's preventable. If people just do what they're supposed to do, in theory, no one has to get it. In theory, no one has to die from it. You know, I have a very strict policy when it relates to lightning, and I follow the guidelines that are out there. If you hear thunder, you can be hit by lightning. So if I'm outside and I hear thunder, I get my ass inside. And yeah, oh, it's way off in the distance. It's like, look, anybody that was ever hit by lightning outside and died from it could have avoided it if they had just gotten their asses inside. It's that simple. It's a preventable death. These viral deaths are preventable. So don't give me this, well, 7,500 people died today of other reasons. That's fine. But 1,000 died today of the coronavirus, or whatever the number is. And I really do believe that there will be a special place in hell for the people who have been deliberately pandering to the human nature that is out there among so many people to find a reason to not take the virus seriously. And that's what some of these folks in the media don't realize. By giving them a reason to feel okay with the choices they're making and the lifestyle they're leading, you're contributing to the spread of the virus. You're contributing to people getting sick. You're contributing to people dying. By encouraging that behavior, their blood is on your hands. And as I said, I hope there's a special place in hell for these people who are deliberately in attempt to profit from it by pandering to the people who want to hear it. It gets back to what I was saying earlier. Dr. Fauci is the parent that disciplines you, and then these people in the media are the parent who will give you a cookie no matter what, even when the last thing you need is a cookie. And you go to, it's that simple. And folks, don't you understand how you're being manipulated here? There are people out there in the media today who are deliberately saying things that those people who want very much to be able to live in the blissful ignorance of the pandemic, allowing themselves to say, I'm right to do what I'm doing, I'm justified to do what I'm doing, and thank you for being a voice in the media that doesn't make me feel guilty about behaviors about which I should feel guilty. So the people who are pushing that stuff, like I said, special place in hell, and hopefully I won't be around to inspect whatever special place in hell that may be. So there's the answer to your question, Robert Block. Look, and I think that this, why haven't I been critical of players participating in large public gatherings? I think that's code for why aren't you saying that people shouldn't be out participating in the protests? And this is one thing I've been meaning to say, and I think Sims and I mentioned this the other day on PFT Live. There's a fundamental difference between participating in protests that organically arose from outrage over decades, if not centuries, of social inequality manifested by the 8-minute and 46-second murder of George Floyd, and people feeling compelled to participate in those protests because they feel that that is a bigger issue than what may happen to them if they get coronavirus or pass along to someone else. And it's just a visceral, I must go out and participate in these protests. That's far different than saying, well, you know what, I really do need to go to Kid Rock's nightclub and be young and have fun and drink Pepsi and not wear a mask. And that's one of the big differences. You look at that photo from over the weekend from the Nashville club, the Kid Rock club, try to find anyone wearing a mask. It's tougher than finding Waldo. Now, you look at protests, a lot of people have masks on. So there's a fundamental difference between people who took a stand for what they believe is right and went out into the streets despite the very real concerns about the virus, and those who are deliberately choosing to engage in selfish behaviors, aided and abetted by the charlatans in the media who are deliberately telling them what they know they want to hear in order to curry their favor, get their traffic, and make money off of them, and hopefully you make your money off of them before they die. All right. Charles C.Z. Wald clarified the point and basically explained what Robert Block was getting at. Organic and long overdue protests are okay, but a private party is the problem. And now Robert Block says, I'm a hypocrite. And here we go. Washington should change its name because one person is genuinely offended, yet kneeling during the anthem is okay, even though many people are offended because they incorrectly find the display to be disrespectful. Let's talk about that for a second. First of all, it's far more than one person that's offended by the Washington nickname, which is a dictionary-defined slur, by the way. You know, people ask me, well, what about Chiefs? Should Chiefs go too? It's like, well, you know what? Chiefs isn't a dictionary-defined slur. The Washington team name is. So let's just focus on that one. You know, I don't know where the line ultimately is, but let's just start with the one that's clearly on the wrong side of it. Now, with Chiefs, I think the issues are more subtle, like a white guy from Topeka wearing a headdress and war paint, probably not the best thing to do. The war chant probably not the best thing to do. Shouting Chiefs at the tail end of the anthem, for a variety of reasons, probably not the best thing to do. So if anything, Robert Block 07, who probably should be blocked, 07, the hypocrisy is in the people who refuse to understand why people are kneeling, who refuse to understand that it is an effort to send a message about a social injustice that needs to end, but insist on carrying forward with a dictionary-defined slur that definitely offends Native Americans. And see, the Washington franchise hides behind, and this is their knee-jerk reaction, the Washington Post poll from 2016, 90% of self-identifying Native Americans say they're not offended. Well, 10% are, and to me, that should be enough. 10% should be enough. Now, I don't know, maybe it takes 20, maybe it takes 25, maybe it takes 30, I don't know. But the other problem is, and we've written about this, and you can find the stories at PFT, that poll is flawed. Okay, self-identifying Native Americans may not be Native Americans. They may not be. Isn't that one of the big issues that was kind of hovering in the campaign? Somebody who was self-identifying as Native American, and there was some other politician who was and still is using a pejorative nickname to make fun of the other politician who self-identifies as Native American but may not be. It's not about who self-identifies as Native American. It's about the people who truly are Native American, the people who are involved in tribal practices. What do they think about it? And I mention that because we have written about and spoken about a study from Cal Berkeley that focused on people who are not just self-identifying, but practicing genuine Native Americans. And the percentage there of the people deeply insulted by nicknames like the Washington franchise, dramatically higher. And the more involved you are in tribal practices, the higher the percentage of offense. So don't try to link the notion that some are saying the Washington franchise name should change with people saying, well, I don't care what you say, I still find it offensive if you kneel during the anthem. If anything, the flip side is what should be true. The people who are kneeling during the anthem have a reason for it, and you should respect that reason for it and respect their ability as citizens of the United States to do whatever they want during the national anthem. This is still a free country. This is not the 11th commandment, thou shalt stand for the national anthem. And I said this earlier today, I think on either on the show or on PFTOT, I can't remember. But the whole idea that we must stand for the anthem and worship the flag is antithetical to what America stands for. Our freedom includes the freedom to not stand for the anthem. It includes the freedom to be at the hot dog counter, not paying attention, oblivious to the anthem. It includes the freedom to be in our phones, looking down, oblivious to the anthem. It includes the power to have your hat on, oblivious to the rules during the anthem. It includes all of the people out there who do things during the anthem without a reason. I mean, what's worse? Using the anthem as a conscious platform for bringing attention to a serious social injustice, or just kind of having your head up your ass and doing whatever, standing in line at the bathroom, talking to somebody, yucking it up, joking around, and not stopping everything you're doing and providing that song and that exercise the reverence it deserves. I hear thunder. At least I'm inside. But there's a chance. We've lost power like 3 times in the last 2 days. So there's a chance this is going to abruptly end, like the finale of The Sopranos. And some of you may think, hey, maybe he got whacked, and maybe you'll be happy about that. But if the screen goes black, first of all, I did not order onion rings. Second of all, there's no one in a members only jacket in my house that I know of. And third of all, I hope to God I'm not dead, but there's a chance I may be. And based upon some of the reactions on Twitter in recent weeks, plenty of you will be happy. I want to address that too. There are people out there in the media who think that Twitter is this bastion of left-wing thinking. I'd sure like to find those people, because I'll tell you what, all I've seen in reaction to the things we've been saying, and for me, it's not an issue of right or left, it's an issue of right or wrong. But the things we've been saying about social injustice, about fulfilling the promise that is America to all people, all men and women are created equal, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, equal justice under law. Those are the words that are carved into stone above the entry to the Supreme Court. And in recent days, hey, the Supreme Court has risen above the political noise. I'll tell you what, any of the stuff that we tweet, the very, very strong ultra-right mindset is thriving on Twitter. So, and it's funny to me how, and I've seen this a lot lately. Well, I don't spend a lot of time on social media, but it's a cauldron of left-wing ideas. Well, if you don't spend time there, how do you know? Well, I never watch One American News. And then people say that, I've never watched it. And then they try to comment on what it is. Well, how the hell can you comment on what it is if you've never seen it, if you don't know anything about it? People just think it's the flip side of CNN or MSNBC, and it's not. And it's not. So anyway, it's amazing to me how, and I guess it's not amazing, because here's the reality. I had peanuts earlier, and I've been dealing with, and the problem is when you're on screen all the time, you don't get a break. I had peanuts earlier. Have that one little piece of peanut that won't get the hell out of your mouth? That one little piece of peanut's been floating around for the last 10 minutes. It's finally gone. I'm sorry that I had to do that, but the peanut is finally gone. Anyway, these media members of the peanut that I can't get out of my mouth, they understand exactly what they're doing. That's why I refer to so many of them as dog whistlers. They are deliberately pandering to the Trump crowd. It's that simple. And there's a lot of people in the Trump crowd. And what they try to do is, without ever saying that they are part of that mindset or that they feel that, and they'll say, I'm not political. I'm not political. I'm not political at all. And then everything they say meshes completely with the political mindset that caters to the ultra right-wing crowd. And they understand why they're doing it. They've decided, look, instead of playing it down the middle and getting some of the traffic, let's cater to one particular angle and get all of the traffic. And let's just do that. And when you see what people who are overtly political in their news and opinions, like a Glenn Beck or whatever the case may be, how much money they make, that's what it's all about. Look, I'm saying what I believe. My opinion has been, and people have been saying, you've been very courageous the past few weeks. It's not courageous. Look, there's nothing courageous about right and wrong. I've been saying what I believe is right. And I don't believe I'm going out on a limb to traffic in what I think is clearly right when it comes to the inequalities that so many have experienced in this country for centuries. And the reality is we're all going to be dead and gone. And when I'm gone, and whether it's my grandkids or their kids or my nieces and nephews, children, and whoever's out there who was related to me in any way, 50, 75, 100 years from now, and they're doing any type of research on this crazy, turbulent time in American history, and hopefully this time stands out as crazy and turbulent and things are a lot better 75 years from now, I don't want there to be any doubt as to where the old dead guy who is decomposing and long since decomposed in the ravine at the back of his 8 acres, I don't want there to be any doubt about where I stood on these issues. Period. That's it. And look, I'm not doing it for money. I'm not doing it for attention. I'm doing it because I think it's right. And if you don't want to believe that, that's fine. Oh, you're just saying that. I'm fine. I can't make you believe me. All I can do is tell you why I'm doing it. And I can tell you that I get increasingly irritated by the people who are pandering to a specific segment of the populace, not believing what they're saying, but sending a clear message, blowing that dog whistle as needed because they perceive a financial benefit by doing so. And it's very similar to the stuff that's gone on with all the people who are trying to make folks feel good about not wearing masks, feel good about not staying home, feel good about not altering anything they're doing in the climate that we're currently in as it relates to the pandemic. All right, I haven't gotten many questions done. I've been going for about 45 minutes here. Let's try this one. Leapers 500, what is the threshold at which the season would be called or canceled when teams lose so many stars that are uncompetitive, players that refuse the risk? You know what I think? Because I look at it this way. There will be an endless supply of players who want to play. 1987, players go on strike. The NFL finds 28 rosters full of replacements like that. Easy to do, right? And I think, if anything, the NFL should be planning something like that, where, as I said this earlier today on PFTOT, instead of expanding the practice squads from 12 to 16, you need to have separate rosters that are, Hugh Jackson is running one, and another former coach, Jeff Fisher, is running another one, and have 4 of them. There's 32 teams. one for every 8 teams. Not that they're assigned to those 8 teams, but you have these guys who are out there in 4 different places practicing in game shape, ready to go. So if there's an outbreak in a given team and they lose 10 or 15 guys who test positive on a Friday or a Saturday or a Sunday morning, you can get these guys in and play the games. And I think the NFL is going to do what it has to do to play the games. I think they'll be ready to plug in new players as needed. I think the thing that could really derail the season is if someone dies from it. If a coach dies, if a player dies, if somebody who is close to the action dies. And let's be realistic about it. Apart from the fact that there are plenty of older coaches, you've got 300-plus pound men, morbidly obese, BMI off the chart, maybe undiagnosed diabetes. We hear all the time, well, hey, if you have diabetes, just, you got to stay inside. Well, there are a lot of people who don't know they have it. You don't just wake up one day and go look in the mirror and it says on your forehead you have diabetes. Sometimes it takes a while to come to the conclusion that that's the reason you felt like crap for the last X number of days, weeks, or months. Remember when Jay Cutler, playing for the Broncos, felt like crap all season long, losing weight, didn't know what was wrong with him? Eventually, somebody decided to give him a glucose test. Imagine that. Imagine that. We draw some blood from this guy and see whether or not he has diabetes. So, it's something that people have without knowing it. And getting extremely sick or dying from COVID-19 is a hell of a way to find out that you have diabetes. So that's what I think the NFL needs to be concerned about. Somebody catching it and somebody dying. It's the equivalent of if somebody were to die from a head injury during a football game, what that would do to football. And I remember Carson Palmer saying 11 years ago, Peter King did a roundtable of quarterbacks at the Lake Tahoe event, the golf event that NBC has every year. And Carson Palmer said somebody's eventually going to die on the field. And I remember that story exploded when we wrote about it at PFT. And somebody's eventually going to die on the field. And, it hasn't happened, thank God. But I think if somebody would die from COVID-19, that would be the thing that would, from a PR standpoint, maybe push the NFL toward pulling the plug. And then think about the NBA in March. One positive test was all it took to pull the plug on the NBA season. Now, the NFL has accepted the fact there will be positive tests. The question is, can they keep those positive tests from becoming serious injury or death? And look, I was led to believe a couple of months ago, and I've yet to go back and have this conversation now, but that the advances in testing, the advances in treatment will make it easier for the NFL to pull off football season. And I hope that's right. I hope there's a rapid response test that's available with saliva or the prick of a finger, and that you can test everybody every day. I just don't think this 2 or 3 times a week is going to be good enough. You've got to be damn sure before anyone goes out on a practice field or into a game, when the bodies cannot be kept 6 feet apart, when the saliva and the droplets and the blood and the sweat will be commingling. That's when you got to be damn sure that none of those 22 guys is positive. And there's only one way to do it. You need to be able to test them before they're in a position where they go out on the field. And we need to be sure they're negative, and it needs to be reliable. And I've heard that the capacity for those kinds of tests is eventually going to be through the roof. There's going to be so much out there by way of testing. It'll be easy to do, and it'll be available, and it'll be daily. And that's what they need. Without that, they're going to have a hard time keeping that virus out of a situation where it's going to potentially spread among players on a practice field or players on a game field. All right. Leapers 500, with what's happening in the country, why is it so hard for some to understand not every edifice of where they stand is lost if this progress is made? Why is it so hard for some to see the merits of racial progress? That's a great question. This gets back to what I was talking about earlier. This is a matter of right and wrong. And see, what I think what happened for a lot of white Americans over the years, when some specific racial injustice would happen, we would acknowledge it, we would feel badly about it, and then we would retreat to our bubble. Day in and day out, things we have to do, raising kids, working jobs, doing whatever, one day after another, 1 week after another, 1 month after another, 1 year after another. We stay in that bubble until the next time something like that happens. We say it's horrible, and then we go back to the bubble. With the execution of George Floyd in 8 minutes and 46 seconds captured on camera, That's the first time in my lifetime that we didn't go back to the bubble, and that people who aren't facing that same risk every time they leave the house, those people continue to be troubled by what happened. And I've seen people push the statistics. Well, only X Black males were killed by police in 2019. It doesn't matter the raw number, and thank God it wasn't more. What matters is that constant threat of it happening, that constant presence, that constant fear that it may happen. That's something that Black Americans have that white Americans don't have. And how did we get to that point? How do we get to that point? Is it some unfounded fear? Or is it the product of years and years and years of inequality, of years and years and years of the people who are driving a car and get pulled over who are Black being treated differently? The police officer is more leery as he or she approaches the car, more quick to pull the gun with a Black person behind the wheel than if it's a white person behind the wheel. So I don't know why this effort. See, I think what's going on is this. For those of us who didn't go back to our bubbles, this is welcome, because we feel badly that we've allowed this, we've participated in this. See, it's not enough to just say, well, I don't feel that way, I don't act that way, I don't treat people that way, so that's good enough. There's more of an obligation, I think, to go beyond that and to push for others to come to that same conclusion and for others to behave the way that we would behave. So we have stayed out of our bubble. The problem is these changes that are being made are keeping the people who want to stay in their bubbles in their bubbles. Their comfort is being disrupted. I saw that comment recently from, I think it was Ben Shapiro, that he doesn't enjoy sports anymore. Not that he looks like a guy that really enjoys sports anyway, but he doesn't enjoy sports anymore because it robs him of his comfort. It deprives him of his comfort or something like that. See, people don't want to be faced with things that make them feel guilty, that make them feel bad, that make them feel uncomfortable. And that's why we hear stick to sports when we raise a topic that comes off as political. We hear stick to sports not when it's any political topic, but when it's a topic that makes someone uncomfortable. They don't want to confront their own beliefs. They don't want to confront their own behavior. And anyone who makes them confront that, they're making them uncomfortable. They're depriving them of their comfort. Stick to sports. I don't want you to tell me that I'm doing something I shouldn't do. I don't want you to tell me that I may be thinking of things in a way that I shouldn't. I don't want you to tell me that I should be staying home and not going out to Kid Rock's bar without a mask and pressing myself against a bunch of other people, even if that means somebody's grandma or grandpa is going to die. I don't want you telling me that. You're disrupting my comfort. I could say a lot more. I think you get the point. People just don't, and it's funny how that term snowflake gets thrown around. Who are the real snowflakes nowadays? Who are really the snowflakes? Have we thought about that? People who can't take hearing things that disrupt their comfort, that force them out of their comfort zone, that force them to consider issues that maybe they should be considering, behaving in ways that maybe they should behave. We don't want that. We want to stay in our comfort zone. You're making us uncomfortable. How dare you? How dare you make me uncomfortable? How much positive change comes without some level of discomfort? How much positive change is done easily? If it was easy, everything would be exactly where it needs to be. These things aren't easy. These things are difficult. The challenge is to get people to understand what's right and what's wrong. And the problem arises from all the efforts by some in the media to move the goalposts, to change the topic. It's not just media members. There are a lot of people that I've tried to reason with. And once you start making salient points, the response is, well, what about this? Well, what about that? Well, what about this? And deflection, deflection, deflection. And it's impossible to get anyone to face the ultimate issue because they constantly move on to something else where they're more comfortable. See, you're making me uncomfortable on this point, so I'm going to go to this point instead where I'm comfortable. And then when you make them uncomfortable on that point, they're going to go over here to this point where they're more comfortable. And then they move the goalposts and you kick the ball through it and you make them uncomfortable, and then they go over here. It's not progress. It's not how to get to where we need to be. Dr. J144, hypothetically, if players at Oklahoma State banded together and tried to force Oklahoma State to replace Mike Gundy with a minority coach. Would they be successful? I get the general feeling over the past month that players have more leverage than they realize with stuff like this. Well, look, I don't know how successful it would be, and I don't know how much leverage they truly have, because what are your options really? Like Chuba Hubbard, if he didn't want to make nice with Mike Gundy, and I'm still not sure based on his demeanor during that video that everything is fine with Chuba Hubbard, but what's he going to do? Is he going to sit out all of 2020 and then enter the draft? The NFL is not going to let him into the supplemental draft over something like this. They don't want to make it easy for guys to get into the supplemental draft because they're trying to protect and preserve the free farm system that is college football. It's not like he could transfer at this point. So if enough players come together, though, and there is a revolt, I don't know. Could there be a new head? It's kind of late in the, I think, and maybe this is how Mike Gundy put out the fire. It's like, hey, guys, there isn't a damn thing we can do at this point that's going to help this team win football games in 2020. So what we can do is find a way to come together and work together, or this season is going to go down the tubes. And we can worry about these other issues after the season. And you know what? For Mike Gundy, when you look at his record the past few years, he's kind of limited on the fumes of 2011 when the team finished number 3 in the AP poll, winning the Fiesta Bowl. Hadn't done a whole lot since then. Hadn't done enough. If you're Lincoln Riley, maybe you can survive some of this. If you're Mike Gundy, I'm not sure you can. And it may be that everybody decides to play nice and hold it all together for now to get through the season. And then after the season, that's when the uprising will come. It doesn't make much sense to jostle for Oklahoma State to fire Mike Gundy at a time when they're just not going to fire him. In November, December, especially if they go at or around 500 again, that's the time to make the stand. Kind of like what Eric Dickerson did with Jeff Fisher. He attacked Jeff Fisher at exactly the right time to get Jeff Fisher fired, near the end of an unsuccessful season. If you start going after Jeff Fisher in August, they're not going to do anything about it in August. They're going to wait until the time comes to fire the guy on the merits, and then it becomes easier to justify it when there's all this other stuff that they have to deal with. All right, let's see what we have here. I'm trying to get through as many of these as I can. James McDonough, Dr. J144, if we've been around long enough to know who Sam in San Francisco is, do we deserve a Twitter follow from PFT? Sam Francisco in San Francisco. It's amazing, Dr. J144, that you remember him. He was a guy who used to call in to the original digital show when we would take phone calls. And he would read from a script, and he would be just borderline nervous as he was delivering it in a way that made it engaging and funny. And he hated Frank Gore. In fact, we had like a phoner that we would put up for Sam, and it would say on there, hates Frank Gore. That's how clear his hatred of Frank Gore was. I wonder how he feels about Frank Gore now. And something happened with the 49ers. Maybe it was 2014, 2013. They ended up, something caused him to kind of just like not renounce his fanhood of the 49ers, but he stopped calling every single time we took questions. And people thought it was a plant, that it was something. No, it was just a guy who called every time. So I'm impressed, Dr. J144, that you remember San Francisco in San Francisco. I don't know that that's going to prompt me to follow your Twitter account, because I try to only follow the accounts that I think are going to give me something that I can use for the purposes of writing stories at PFT. But as always, I will take that under advisement. A Red Zone Out, an old school member of the PFT posse who was asking questions long ago on the digital show. Will players become reluctant to report any coronavirus related symptoms? Well, yes. And the protocol that was put out a week and a half ago by the NFL, it's got a screening procedure, questions that the players get asked every day. Do you really think a player is going to say, I don't feel well? Especially if that player isn't a player whose job is guaranteed. Remember a few years ago, everyone was praising Ben Roethlisberger for tapping out of a game. I think it was against the Seahawks because he had concussion symptoms. Well, he's not going to lose his job to his backup. But if you're at danger of losing the job to the backup, or if you are the backup, if you're fighting for the job, if you're worried that if you test positive, you're not going to have a job, are you going to walk in and say, I don't feel right. I haven't felt right for the past couple of days. I don't think you're going to do that. And I'm telling you, folks, I think it would be a horrible mistake if anyone does it. But I think guys are going to deliberately expose themselves in June and July to the virus so they have the antibodies and they assume that they're good to go. right? There are a lot of people that just want to get it and be done with it. And they'd rather have it now in June when nothing's going on than have it and develop it during football season and get shut down for 2 or 3 weeks. Those guys that are on the fringe to make the roster, if in August and you're fighting for a roster spot, you're one of the guys trying to go from 90 to 53. If you get it and you're gone for 2 or 3 weeks, do you really think you're making the team? There are going to be guys who are tempted to get it. And I think it would be a mistake because, first of all, and remember this, anyone out there who's thinking of this, we still don't know for sure that if you have had it, you're in the clear and you're not at risk of getting it again. So until we know what it conclusively means to have the antibodies, to have already had the coronavirus, it's nothing that's going to give you a free pass to play for the full season or be around for all of training camp. And oh, by the way, it can still make you extremely sick or worse. Another one from A Red Zone Knock. I need to wrap this up. We've been going a long time. Will Roger Goodell attend a game and take a knee this year? I don't know that he will. I don't know that he even fits within the classification of the tier 1 people who are going to be allowed on the sidelines during a game. Look, I think what the NFL is going to do, they're going to support the players to an extent. The owners have still yet to come out and say they support the players. See, the owners are trying to play nice with the president, especially the owners who support the president. And people like Greg Popovich and who else made this point? There was a player who made this point recently that it's Michael Bennett who, have said it's hard to reconcile supporting the players and their interest in protesting during the anthem and also supporting the president when the president has made it clear that he is strongly and vehemently opposed to any type of anthem protest. So I think the league is going to try to find a way, not necessarily to have a middle ground, but they're going to try to find ways to not unnecessarily and gratuitously agitate the president. There are going to be plenty of things that the president won't like, but they're not going to go out of their way to make him notice. And I think if the commissioner takes a knee, that's one of those things that is going to attract the attention, the wrath, and the venom of the president. There have been recent developments that the president didn't notice. J.J. Watt, Baker Mayfield saying they're going to take a knee. Not a peep from the president. Bill O'Brien, coach of the Texans, saying he's going to kneel during the anthem. Not a peep from the president. So I believe the commissioner when he says they're not going to let the criticism from the president deter them. But I don't think they're going to go out of the way to pick a fight with the president. They're going to ignore the attacks. They're not going to engage him. And they're going to hope that he doesn't notice everything that could cause him to go to Twitter and rally the base on the issue of protests during the anthem. All right. I need to wrap this up. There's still several more questions here. CZ Wald, in the Rayshard Brooks, let me do this. In the Rayshard Brooks situation, where do you stand on the police responsibility for society and the greater good? It is awful that a life was lost. Truly, where is the line? Police were assaulted and a weapon was stolen. What about the police responsibility to the public? Look, I do not believe that Rayshard Brooks was presenting an immediate threat to the life of either of those officers or anyone else around. He was drunk. He resisted arrest, which he shouldn't have done. First of all, he shouldn't have been behind the wheel of a car while drunk, and he was going to face the consequences for that. He shouldn't have resisted arrest, and he would have faced the consequences for that. He shouldn't have resisted arrest with violence. That's a felony, and he should have faced the consequences for that. He shouldn't have taken the taser and run away. He shouldn't have done that, and he would have and should have faced the consequences for that. But nothing that he did justified the police officer taking on the role of judge, jury, executioner with no opportunity for any type of a reprieve from the governor, immediately carrying out the sentence with a line of cars sitting in the Wendy's drive-thru right next to where all of this was playing out. And oh, by the way, a bullet hole in one of those other cars. Rayshard Brooks was not a threat to the life of either of those officers or anyone else. They knew where he lived. They had his ID. As someone on MSNBC said the other night, it's not like a helicopter was going to emerge and take him to Kathmandu. This isn't a serial killer on his way to his next victim. This is a guy who was drunk enough to fall asleep in the drive-thru line at Wendy's. He faced criminal consequences for his behavior, but he did not deserve to die. And the use of deadly force in that setting was reckless and unjustified. And I've heard people say, well, that's standard operating procedure. Well, you know what? The procedure needs to change. The procedure needs to change. The use of deadly force should be the absolute last resort that is used by police officers. That gun should be the last thing that comes out of the holster. And it should only happen when that person is presenting an immediate risk to the life of the police officer or someone else. Now, if Rayshard Brooks had grabbed a gun and taken off, then the shots need to be fired. If he's pointing a gun, if he's pointing a taser, no. And I saw, I don't know whether it was one of the lawyers or someone from the police union. Well, they shot him in the only area of his body that presented himself at the time, his back. And I didn't know whether to laugh or cry when I saw that. They shot him in the back. When you shoot someone in the back who is running away from you, what risk are they presenting to you at that time? And maybe you pulled out the gun when he was turning to you with the taser. Maybe that's when you pull out the gun. But when he turns his back, why are you pulling the trigger when he turns his back? And if you're not someone who can be trusted in that moment to turn off whatever it is inside of you that has taken over, whether it's ego because you got punched by this guy, whether it's adrenaline because what was a very innocuous police interaction all of a sudden turned into something that wasn't innocuous, whatever it is that kept that person from recognizing, I should not pull the trigger and shoot this man in his back while he's running away. Whatever that was, it shows that the person isn't fit to be a police officer. It shows that the person isn't fit to be carrying a gun. And like so many other things in today's society, it's amazing that there are two sides to this. How can there be two sides to every issue? How can that be? I mean, people think the earth is flat. People think the moon landing was fake. People think there is not universal agreement on anything. How can that be? How can you watch the video of Rayshard Brooks being shot and killed and think that was an appropriate use of deadly force? How can you get your brain to the point where the guy gets shot in the back and that's okay when he was pointing a taser, not a gun? I guess even if he had an actual gun, by the time he's turned and running, you pull the gun and you hold it on him. And then if he turns back with the gun, then you shoot him. But he's running away. He's running away. So I look, and we spent a lot of time thinking about these things, writing about these things and talking about these things because there is a clear overlap right now to the National Football League, because the National Football League is such an important part of our public life, and the players have a voice and they're exercising that voice, and the coaches have a voice and they're exercising that voice. The owners aren't doing much, and I hope at some point they will. But these are very, very uncertain times. There are times on one hand of hope, but on the other hand, it's disheartening. It's disheartening to see how many people just refuse to accept that equality is something we should aspire for. I don't get it. Can someone explain to me? Maybe instead of, and it's very worthwhile to study and understand why it is that Black Americans feel like they have been the targets of discrimination from the system for years. And it's important. I'm not saying instead of. How about in addition to that? Is there some way, maybe I need to interview somebody who just flat out, but see, that's the thing, they'll never admit it. They'll throw out all these roadblocks and hurdles to the points that we're making. And like I said earlier, they'll move the goalpost to something else. I don't understand what the opposition is. Kyler Murray explained it so well on Wednesday. This is a matter of right and wrong. This is a matter of equality or inequality. why is anyone taking a stand against equality? Why is anyone taking a stand against change that will finally guarantee for all Americans the promise that is America, the promise that was vested for all Americans on July 4, 1776? I don't get it. Let me see if there's anything else here. All right. Trying to find one more before we wrap this up. Brian Stanley at Donkey170 with the University of Texas news, 13 positive tests. It's obvious the NFL will face consistent positive results unless it's in a bubble. How will they react? I personally see it's just the flu strategy coming back. Look, I don't know that that's what's going to come back. The bottom line is, if someone's positive, even if they're asymptomatic, if they test positive, they're not going to be allowed to play. And I guess all they could really do is just only test when someone has symptoms. That's the only way around this. Just go ahead and let it, like the Sweden approach, let it wash through the NFL population and just assume that a lot of guys are going to be positive and only worry about it when someone has the symptoms. That's all they could do, other than what they are doing, which is have an aggressive testing protocol. And if someone is positive, they're not allowed onto a practice field, onto a game field, into a locker room, anywhere around any other players. That's the only responsible thing to do. So the question becomes, at what point do we recognize that there's just no way to do this? And maybe that's where this is headed. Maybe that's where it's headed with college football, because there's too many programs, too many players, too many variables, too much stuff. It's too hard to get 20-year-olds, 19-year-olds, 18-year-olds to do what they're supposed to do. Maybe the only hope is 32 NFL teams where it is drilled into their brains what they need to do when they're away from the facility, and they fully buy in for 4 months. And there's accountability within the team, the Tom Brady's of the world, making sure that their teammates aren't doing stupid things that would expose them to the virus. Maybe that's the only hope. And I'll come back to something I was talking about yesterday. The fact that ESPN reportedly is withholding naming a Monday Night Football broadcast team because if there's no college football this fall, they want it to be Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit. The fact that ESPN has that plan tells me ESPN knows something the rest of us don't. And it tells me that somewhere within the corridors at the campus in Bristol, someone has made the conclusion. They think there's a pretty good chance there isn't going to be college football, but there will be NFL football. And you know what? I went for a stretch thinking it's going to be difficult to have any football. Then I went through a stretch thinking the NFL will pull it off because there's too much money involved not to pull it off. It's going to be too hard for college to pull it off. And then I went through a stretch thinking, hey, they're just going to be football. And now I'm starting to swing back toward there may not be college football, but maybe there will be pro football. And if that's the case, remember we spent time talking about, well, what would the NFL do? Will they play games on Saturdays? They should. They should play games on Saturdays in the same 3 windows that we see on Sundays, and they should maybe drop a game on Friday nights. But I'm starting to think that's where this is headed. Nobody knows where it's headed. The NFL claims it has a plan for everything. I don't know what the details are. Do they know what the details are? How buttoned up are the plans? Is the NFLPA on board? Are the coaches on board? Will everyone do what they need to do? A lot of questions to be resolved. And we're going to be here every step of the way. I very much want, trust me, I want there to be a football season. And I want the NFL to handle things in a way that ensures there will be a football season. A lengthy PFTPM has come to a conclusion. Big Cat joins me tomorrow for PFT Live. We have coverage around the clock of all things NFL at ProFootballTalk.com, even in this slow time, which is not as slow as I thought it was going to be, because there are plenty of issues to be discussed and dissected in the NFL, and we will do that all the time, all day, every day at ProFootballTalk.com. We'll see you on Friday morning, and we'll see you all day, every day at ProFootballTalk.com. Have a great day. Thanks for some of your time. We'll see you the next time we do PFTPM.